What happens in the outhouse stays in the outhouse. It all started 5 days ago. My friend Sarah was telling me about her latest sexual escapade. I stared at her. Jaw dropped. Overcome by disbelief. What the actual peep? Don't knock it till you try it. Charlotte. Over a medium 4-cheese pizza. Sarah told me how she'd started having sex in outhouses with her boyfriend. Biff. I knew they were freaky. Biff, a total meathead, was up for just about anything. But this was a surprise. Doesn't it stink? I asked. I can't even go into most outhouses. Doesn't it kill the mood? Sarah stifled a laugh. I know. It sounds crazy. But there's something hot as hell about it. Just totally peeping nasty. You have to let go completely. Though. You have to accept that even after a few showers, you'll still feel dirty. But it's amazing. I'm telling you. Biff and I are closer than ever. Thoroughly disgusted as I was, a part of me understood why Sarah was telling me that Rob and I should try it out. That's why Sarah had arranged our dinner date in the first place. Sarah and I were close. She'd known for months about how Rob and my relationship was on the rocks. Rob and I were as unhappy as we'd ever been. He spent most of his time watching videos of hot girls on TikTok or drinking beers with his buddies and avoiding my texts. I wasn't groveling his feet either. He'd become perfectly content with watching Netflix, hanging out with Baxter, and taking care of my own needs. Baxter was our pug. We'd bought him together in better times. I sometimes wondered what would happen to Baxter if Rob and I split up. Deciding who gets to keep the memory, as it's yet another thing that complicates a broken relationship. Long story short, there was nothing about Rob's and my relationship that felt refreshing or meaningful anymore. Not that outhouse sex would have been either of those things. Still, I appreciated Sarah trying. So I gave her the benefit of the doubt. How do you even initiate that conversation? I asked. Hey Rob. Are there any outhouses on your construction site? A honey bucket. Maybe? Let's go inside and get sexy. Not a construction site, said Sarah. It has to be on a campground. And preferably at night. It adds to the mood. No chance in hell I'd have sex in a construction site. Honey bucket. You have to find an outhouse with character. Oh. Also, it has to be a new one every time. Sarah had so much experience with outhouse sex that she'd codified a set of ground rules. It revealed how far this thing had gone. Charlotte, we not? She asked. I know things are bad between you and Rob. What could it hurt? I mean, sure. Whatever. It couldn't hurt. Sarah was right about that. Rob's and my 3-year-long relationship had become a train wreck. But what about my pride? My dignity? If our relationship somehow got better after having sex in an outhouse, was it really worth saving in the first place? I wasn't a prude by any means. But outhouse sex sounded about as depraved as it could possibly get. My parents had done their best to help me build a moral compass. I like to think they did a pretty good job. In this case, the needle was pointing in exactly the opposite direction of what Sarah was telling me to do. Just ask Rob, said Sarah. See what he says. No harm in asking. Right? A few hours later, before Rob left to meet his friends at the bar, I broached the conversation. I'd do anything to go back in time and let Rob's and my relationship die. If only I'd listened to my conscience. Have sex, said Rob. In an outhouse. Rob was a big guy. 6'4" and well over 250 pounds. Thick-set and strong as a bear. I remembered the days of being held in his arms. Strong hands forged from years of building custom homes. One of Rob's eyebrows was raised. He had his keys in one hand, his jacket in the other. He was looking at me like I was an undiscovered insect species, rather than his girlfriend of 3 years. 3 years. 2 of which had been so good we'd talked once or twice about getting married. Baxter was twining his way between our feet. attuned to the awkwardness of the conversation. "Never mind," I said, beginning to turn away. "It's a stupid idea." "Why not?" Rob asked. "Are you being serious? You were just looking at me like I was totally crazy." "Totally crazy in a good way," he said. "We've tried concerts weekend vacations. Hell, we spent $1,000 on couples therapy. Talk about crazy." There it was again, Rob making me feel bad for the thousands of dollars we'd wasted trying to fix things. "Right," I said. Once again. "Never mind." Rob grabbed my arm. "Charlie." "Wait. Charlie." He hadn't called me Charlie in months. It was his pet name for me. It only ever came out in the truly sweet moments between us. But sweetness felt incongruous to a discussion about outhouse sex. Rob took my hand. There was something gentle in his touch. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm being serious," he said. "Don't be embarrassed. I think it's cool that you're trying. I haven't been trying. At least you're giving it a shot. We've had some really good times together. I know you probably don't believe it. But when I go out with my buddies, it's not because I'm happy." His eyes had welled with tears. "I'm peeping miserable if you want to know the truth," he said. "And as bats peep insane as having sex in an outhouse sounds. Maybe it'll turn things around. I'll take a flyer on it." "You're actually serious?" He nodded. "You remember that time when we went to the beach?" Without Rob specifying which time, I knew what he was talking about. It was one of our best memories. Not long before we decided to get Baxter. Not long before our first discussion about marriage. "I remember those days. Charlie," he said. "You might think I don't. But I do. I always thought you were the one. It still crosses my mind even though things have been bad. I don't want to give up on this. When it was good, it was better than anything that's happened in my life. Connections like ours don't just die overnight. I still love you." I started laughing and noticed the hurt look on Rob's face. "No," I said, trying to collect myself but still overcome with laughter. "I'm not laughing at you. What are you laughing about then? Take a step back. Rob." Baxter had started snorting and chasing his curly cute tail. It's what he did when he got excited. He sensed the sudden levity. There hadn't been much laughter in our house in the last year. I took a deep breath and wiped the tears from my eyes. I guess I never thought that outhouse sex would be what helped us decide to fix our relationship. Rob's serious expression inverted, turning into a smile. He started cracking up, then pulled me into a big bear hug. "Let's do this thing," he said. "It'll be good for us." Not long after Rob and I finished talking, I called Sarah to ask if there were any outhouses she would recommend for first-timers. I was honest about being nervous as hell. I told her I'd prefer someplace with less foot traffic. She told me about an abandoned campground she and Biff had been scouting for a while. Sarah said the campground had an old-fashioned kind of outhouse. The kind that's built into the ground. A little research showed that the campground had been there over 100 years until it was retired by forest rangers 2 summers before. 20 minutes later, Rob and I were driving down a rutted old road, deep into the forest about 30 minutes from home. The gate at the start of the road had been unlocked. The headlights of Rob's truck cut through the darkness. But the trees seemed to press in on us. They were so thick you couldn't see the moon or the stars. I was scared. I'd always been claustrophobic. The road had become overgrown. Even in its prime, it would have been narrow. Made for the kinds of cars that existed before oversized trucks like Rob's hit the market. The trees clawed at the truck, their branches scraping at the side like fingernails. "Are you worried about the paint job?" I asked. Rob loved his truck. "Peep it," he said, laughing. "I'm too excited. I'll buff it tomorrow." Though the truck's high beams were on, they only lit 10 or 15 feet in front of us. Given the windiness of the old road, After another 10 minutes of driving, we came to a clearing. The abandoned campground. It was about 50 yards in diameter. Big enough for 10 campsites. Even though the forest had started encroaching on the open ground, the sites were still clearly visible. Each one had an old metal grill. The truck's headlights revealed that the grills were strangled with vines and rusty from weather and disuse. On the far side of the campground, I saw it. The old outhouse that Sarah had recommended. Rob drove over and parked in front of it. It was the old-fashioned kind. Narrow and wooden, with the shape of a crescent moon carved into the door. Rob killed the headlights. Darkness enveloped the cab of the truck. We got out. I looked up to see that the stars and moon were clear and brilliantly bright. We were so far from civilization that there was zero light pollution. We may as well have been floating freely among the stars. Rob grabbed his mag flashlight and swept it across the campground. He illuminated the shadows, nothing there. But I still felt a bit unsettled. The beam of Rob's flashlight swept up to the sky. I felt a sudden presence behind me and turned to see Rob, holding the light vertically under his chin's scary flashlight face. The classic TV trope. "Do you want to play a game?" Rob said, adopting Jigsaw's gravelly tone. "Cut it out." He laughed. "But really? We should you know. Get inside or whatever." He pointed the beam at the outhouse, which stuck up from the ground like a singular fang. Rob was tense with excitement. He grabbed my hand and led me toward it. Looking down, I could see the shape of his massive erection outlined in his jeans. He opened the door, and we stepped inside. I was hit by the stale smell of decades-old human waste. But it wasn't as pungent or thick as I expected. The outhouse hadn't been used recently. After all, it had a history. Over 100 years of it. But except for maybe a forest ranger or two on patrol or partying teenagers, the thing hadn't seen consistent use since the campground shut down. There was one step leading up to a platform. Atop the platform was the wooden square that served as the toilet, perched like a throne. There was a dangerously big hole ringed with a makeshift wooden toilet seat. From outside, the outhouse had looked impossibly narrow. But inside, there was much more space than I had thought. Rob turned off his flashlight. So I said, "How should we?" Rob threw the door closed with a bang. He grabbed my face in both hands and pressed it to his, kissing me, shoving his pelvis forward. Butterflies took flight from the deepest part of my stomach. I said yes, even without saying it, wrapping my arms around Rob and pulling him closer. I unbuttoned my pants. Rob did the same. Then he pushed himself inside of me. I exploded with ecstasy. It was a high that dwarfed anything I'd ever felt. Rob lifted me off my feet, cupping my ass in both hands, pulling my legs apart to push himself even deeper. He turned and sat me down on the toilet set. Then he got on his knees on the stair below the platform. It was a perfect fit, as if the structure had been built for this exact purpose. For Rob's and my exact height. I leaned my head back and looked up through cracks in the ceiling. I saw the stars and the moon. They cast a silvery light into the darkness of the outhouse. Below me, from the depths of the latrine pit, a draft of cold air whooshed up, creating imaginary steam where it met the heat coming off of us. It was quick, 2 minutes at most. An act so passionate, so forbidden given the setting that I climaxed 3 times. "Rob," I gasped. Roby stopped taking my birth control. He looked into my eyes. "So what? Let's just keep going. Let's be careful," I said. "Let's see how things feel tomorrow." He smiled. Past the fiery passion of our union, I saw love spilling over, uncontained. Rob and my love story had reached an incredible, dangerous new page. "Okay," he'd begun, gasping. "Okay. Here I go." He pulled out. I moved aside. He stood up, aimed downward, and prepared to release a year's worth of pent-up energy. Leaning against the wall of the outhouse, I smiled. I was happy for him. For us. And I was grateful for Sarah and her insane recommendation. The happiness and gratitude I felt in that moment were impossible to quantify. But then, something happened that made my stomach turn. Happiness turned to horror. The outhouse was dark. But I could still make out shapes thanks to the moonlight shining through overhead. As Rob climaxed, I saw two bony, pale hands reach up from the open toilet. Rob's head was kicked back. So he didn't notice. The hands were cupped together. The entirety of Rob's orgasm shot into them. He finished. The cupped hands closed. Then they disappeared. I screamed. "Me too," said Rob, collapsing against the wall next to me. "Me too, babe." "No," I said, pulling up my pants. "No." Rob something reached out. Rob opened his heavy-lidded eyes. "The darkness," he said. "It's playing tricks on you. Charlie. Just you and me in here." Rob hadn't seen what I'd seen. Terrified, I ran out of the outhouse, tripping over the slight drop and stumbling until I reached the hood of Rob's truck. He caught up to me, catching his breath and buckling his pants. "Charlie. It's nothing. It's okay." "No. Rob. I saw something." Something reached out. He pulled me into a hug, holding my head close. "All that built-up tension," he said. "I felt it too. But you're just seeing things. Charlie. It's just you and me here. You and me and the awesomeness of what we just did." I felt safe in Rob's arms. And his word's acknowledgement of the tension, maybe it was just that. Still, I couldn't shake my unsettledness. "Let's just go," I said. "We can talk about it in the car." He nodded. "No problem. I gotta take a piss first, though." He smiled and kissed me. "Goddamn. That was awesome. We're definitely debriefing on the way home." "Just hurry up," I said, pulling away. "I don't like how dark it is here." Rob walked into the trees nearby and began relieving himself. I couldn't take my eyes off the outhouse. I expected whatever I'd seen reaching up, whether real or imagined, to crawl out. A breeze had settled in. I heard something in the night, amidst the clacking tree branches and whistling reeds. "Patriarch, patriarch. What the peep? Rob. Do you hear that?" He jogged over, zipping his pants. "Hear what?" "Voices," I said. "I heard voices. They're chanting something." "You're just freaking yourself out. Charlie. Let's get in the truck." We got in. I immediately locked my door. I wrung my hands, waiting for Rob to start the ignition. "God damn it," he said. "I forgot my flashlight." "No way," I said. "No chance. We're leaving right now. I'll buy you another one on Amazon. It'll be at our house in a day or two. That's my favorite flashlight," said Rob. "I got it as a gift." "Rob. Seriously. Let's go. Please. I'll just be 1 second." Rob got out of the truck. He jogged toward the outhouse. My heart was pounding so hard I struggled to draw a breath. As he stepped inside, the outhouse door closed behind him. The beam of his flashlight popped to life. Then the beam started shaking violently. It was flashing around, creating an eerie strobe-like effect that flickered through the crooked wooden struts. I heard Rob yell. I opened my door and jumped out. "Patriarch. Patriarch. Who the peep, what the peep are you?" Rob's words were cut off by the sound of the flashlight's lens shattering. The light still shone, but it was fragmented, the bulb damaged. I ran forward despite every instinct telling me not to, urged on by Rob's agonized screams. "Patriarch. Patriarch." Throwing open the outhouse door, I saw that Rob was lying on his back above the toilet. his arms and legs flailing. Despite his size, he looked small, overpowered. A dozen pale hands grasped at his body, reaching up from the pit below. Their long, slender fingers were wrapped around Rob's stomach and chest, forming what looked like a second rib cage. Patriarch! Patriarch! I ran forward. Rob continued screaming. I heard a bone crack. The force of the hands wrapped around him, crushing downward. I tried to pry the fingers away, but they were immovable. I grabbed Rob's leg and began pulling as hard as I could. He'd started folding into a V shape, wrenched downward into an opening that was too small for his 6'4" frame. Oh God, I teeth peeping hurts, oh my peeping God, make it stop. Rob's bones began to crack. Patriarch! The strange chanting emanated from the pit below the outhouse. Patriarch! Rob! Please! I sobbed. Please, please, please. Hold on. The sound of Rob folding completely in half cut off my words. His screams stopped as he let out a deep grunt. Then, a huff of breath like the air gushing out of a punctured tire. The hands yanked Rob through the toilet opening, breaking the toilet seat, scalping him on the edge of the hole. He disappeared into the darkness. I heard a massive bang. Then, silence. I grabbed the busted flashlight, whose fragmented beams still shone past angular shards of glass. I pointed it into the pit. The first thing I saw was the wooden scaffolding. An intricate, haphazard structure had been built atop an unstable surface of decades old, partially fossilized steep. A series of walkways made their way up, stopping 5 feet below the hole. Just to the side of the toilet's opening, there was a massive blood spot on the scaffolding where Rob's newly scalped head had struck it. I moved the beam to see that Rob was lying atop the mountain of steep some 20 feet below. He was seizuring, his brain damaged irreparably from the fall, foam spilling out from the corners of his mouth. His arms and legs flailed around crazily, making a revolting snow angel in the waist. Several hunchbacked figures came into view, a half-dozen owners of the hands that had pulled Rob through. They began feasting on him, tearing into his flesh. Then they grabbed his body and lifted. They carted him away into the darkness as he continued to convulse, their strange chant trailing away as they went deeper into the pit. Rob, please, please. A face appeared in the hole, then the twisted, mutant face of an old crone. Matriarch. Her breath smelled like a corpse's, 1,000 times worse than the decomposing waste below. Matriarch. Matriarch. The crone's hand shot up and grabbed my throat, her nails digging into my flesh. Without thinking, I swung the metal flashlight down, connecting with her brown, rotten teeth. They crumbled, but she held strong. I swung a half-dozen more times. Her face became a spongy red mass. One more swing on more wet crack and she loosened her grip. She fell from the scaffolding to the same spot where Rob had formed his sickening snow angel. With blood pouring out of the gouges the crone's nails had torn into my skin. I looked down. More of the hunchbacked mutants had begun to make their way up the scaffolding toward me, a dozen more at least. The speep-filled cavity below the outhouse was teeming with the once human creatures. Matriarch. Matriarch. Hating myself for leaving Rob behind, I turned and ran. I tripped, sprawling from the outhouse to the ground outside. Hyperventilating, I pulled myself toward the truck, climbing to my knees, catching my feet. Looking behind me, I saw hands reaching out of the toilet. One of the abominations lurched out, then began scuttling toward me like a spider. It was a woman. They were all women. 2 more came out. And then, from the forest, came even more, crawling out of various holes in the earth. Matriarch. Matriarch. Sweeping the flashlight back and forth, I saw that they were of varying some old, some young, some far too young, children, and dozens of the women, dozens of them had full, pregnant bellies. I thought, horrified, of Rob's semen shooting into the cupped hands that had reached up from the toilet. What might have been our son or daughter, stolen away for the disturbed purposes of this underground dwelling civilization of mutant women. Fighting for life, I listened to my instincts, stood, and ran to the truck. I threw open the door and got in. Starting the ignition, the headlights illuminated the space between me and the outhouse. Dozens more of the women. 100 no old, young, pregnant, practically bursting at the seams thanks to the mutants growing inside. I stepped on the gas, speeding forward, crushing several of the crawling women under the tires of Rob's truck, smashing into others to a chorus of breaking bones, all underscored by continuous chanting. Matriarch. Matriarch. I sped forward, turning the truck, careening through the campground. I got to the winding, rutted road. More of the women were crawling out of the woods, appearing from everywhere. But I sped forward, cutting a new path, smashing Rob's truck against various trees in the process. After what seemed like an hour of driving, I reached the highway near the campground's open gate. Looking in the rear view, there was no one Terreno women. No sign of them. But their blood still covered the truck. And I heard their voices pounding in my head. Matriarch. Matriarch. I stepped on the gas, speeding down the highway in the direction of our hometown. And did the only thing I could think of. I called the police. The ringing blurted to life robotically on Rob's Bluetooth. 911. What's your emergency? I couldn't find the words. I couldn't explain what I'd just seen. I drove forward, 80 miles per hour and climbing, as the dispatcher continued asking how she could help. I spent the rest of the night at the police station. I dealt with the shame of telling the officers that Rob and I had been having sex in an outhouse. My embarrassment was underscored by the horror of reliving the experience, of watching Rob ripped to shreds by a horde of cannibalistic mutants. The cops couldn't deny that something horrifying had happened. They couldn't say it was a figment of my imagination. I had a torn-up throat and Rob's destroyed, blood-covered truck as proof. The next morning, after taking a shower at the station, a few of the detectives drove me out to the campground. We met a forest ranger who patrolled that area. Together, we drove down the rutted road, which was wider thanks to my reckless driving the night before. We got to the outhouse. There were hundreds of footprints around the campground but no sight of the mutant. Once upon a time human creatures. Inside the outhouse, just like I told them it would be. The toilet was practically destroyed due to Rob being pulled through. The ranger shone his flashlight into the pit as we crowded inside the structure. The scaffolding was still there. It's what they kept underneath these old outhouses, he said. Back before they decided to just dump in lime and backfill them. Rangers almost treated it like a sewer, doing maintenance down there occasionally. I feel bad for whoever drew the short straw. It was a missing persons case, so the detectives said they needed a closer look. No straws were drawn. A rookie detective got the honor of rappelling down into the pit. The ranger gave him a gas mask he kept in his truck in the event of a forest fire. With the winch on the ranger's truck, they lowered the rookie cop in. We watched from overhead as he explored the depths, casting his flashlight around. 20 minutes later, they pulled him out. He stripped off his clothes, changing into others cobbled together from the various cars that had arrived at the scene. "What did you see down there?" asked the lead detective. The rookie had taken off his gas mask. He lit a cigarette that one of the other cops offered him. "Darkness," the rookie said. "Too much of it. Darkness and an endless field of speep." "Did you see the young man's body?" The detective nodded to me. "Or the creatures she mentioned?" The rookie shook his head. "Only a door. A door built into the wall of dirt at the edge of the pit." "A door?" "Yeah. A big concrete door. Solid as a peeping rock. More of a slab." "Really? No chance we're moving that thing." The ranger shrugged. "I mean, Maybe it leads to some sewer equipment? I don't know. This seems way too elaborate for a latrine pit. In the old days, rangers would go down to dig more space or whatnot. But it's not like there's piping down there. Nothing like that. Agreed the rookie. That door wasn't made by any forest rangers. How do you know? Demanded the detective. I've never seen anything like it. Sir. The rookie replied. Carved into the stone. There were symbols. Some strange, hieroglyphic type speak. It wasn't English. That's for goddamn sure. And maybe it's just my imagination playing tricks on me. But it felt like there was energy coming from the other side. The detective continued staring at the rookie. His eyes squinted skeptically. Sir. I know it sounds nuts. Continued the rookie. But the goddamn door was thrumming. It was alive. More cops arrived at the scene and rappelled down into the pit. They tried to move the strange door to no avail. One posited the bright idea of blowing it up with dynamite. But the forest ranger put his foot down. That pit is filled with 100 years worth of methane and hydrogen. You use dynamite or even light a match. And everything within a mile of here is going up in flames. My job's to protect this forest from fires. Not start them. In the interest of public safety, they decided on the next steps. A missing persons report was filed for Rob. Then, they filled the latrine pit with 50 gallons of lime, tore down the outhouse, and filled the pit in with a backhoe. Late at night, Baxter lying in bed next to me. The both of us missing Roby think about what happened that night at the abandoned campground. What scares me the most is imagining the door the rookie cop described. The one etched with a strange, inhuman language. Whatever was on the other side of it causing it to thrum with strange energy will stay there forever. Unknown. But perhaps it's for the best. If there's one positive to be found. I no longer hear the women's chanting. Not out loud. At least, I really do believe I'm safe from the matrons. That's what I've come to call them. But that doesn't change the fact that I hear their phantom words echoing in my head. It doesn't change the fact that whenever I close my eyes, I see Rob's convulsing, eviscerated body making grim snow angels amidst the waste. Memorias, the good and the bad ones, they stay with us until the day we die. WCD. Leave a like and a comment if you liked the video. Check out more Reddit related video, I am posting them daily. Subscribe to see more Reddit content.